We are back with Henry and Roger. We have an interesting new polling from Quinnipiac, which shows African American support in particular. It's the crosstab that I wanted to look at. It's got 46% support for Joe Biden, 10% for Elizabeth Warren, 10% for Bernie Sanders, 7 and 3 for Cory Booker, respectively. And Michael Bennett popped up on this with 3%. I'm not exactly sure how that one happened. But I think, Roger, I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but yeah, right. But 60% of the South Carolina primary electorate is African American. So whoever carries the majority of that is just going to sweep that primary, and it's going to massively benefit them in Super Tuesday. Now, you worked on the Obama campaign where there was a similar dynamic of African American supporters did not back Obama until he won Iowa. So in the converse, what would it take for these candidates, Warren and Bernie, in order to carry the African American vote away from Joe Biden that he has solidified right now?
My overall sense of it is that Warren still has some room because she's still at kind of the tail end of like an introduction exercise. The good news, for Senator Sanders is that he's run before, and the bad news for Senator Sanders is that he's run before. So like there's less room for introductions and persuasion and things like that. And I also think Senator Warren, coming from Massachusetts, which I think we can all agree is the most consequential state in the union, is also going around and reaching out to Mississippi, reaching out to West Virginia. So like there's different kind of touch points as you reach out to these constituencies, and I think she's doing that in an intelligent way because it resonates in the early states when they see national coverage where someone's going out to red states and reaching out to minorities in red states and things like that. So that's my snapshot sense of
What do you think, Hank?
I'm not surprised by those numbers, honestly. I think, coming from Barack Obama, Joe Biden, this whole thing is going to help him a lot within the black community. And also, I completely actually agree with Roger on what he was saying with the introduction to Elizabeth Warren. This is kind of, she's building her real national base right now. And this is kind of her time. We're seeing these thousands of people. We're seeing these crowds show up. So I think eventually she could get there. I don't see that really happening for Bernie. I think he's already had his shot with that crowd.
It's possible, though. I mean, he's actually got higher support, not necessarily in this poll, but amongst younger black voters, and he's around there with Biden. But we should also talk about, go ahead.
The way that the media has covered Sanders' campaign would lead a passive follower to conclude that he has no shot whatsoever. Which opens the possibility, maybe, I don't know what you think of this, Roger, that if he wins Iowa and if he wins New Hampshire, then all of a sudden he's a different candidate. When he didn't have a lot of black support in 2016, nobody thought he was going to win. So if all of a sudden it looks like he might win, is there a new lens that voters are looking at him through? Or no, you think he's shot?
I mean, Iowa's the biggest slingshot in the world, right? That said, first off, I don't think he's going to win Iowa. And then I didn't see in 2016, in 2016 and 2015, a real capacity on the part of his organization to grow. And if I can, I'll show you a very, very quick story. Once John Kerry won Iowa in 2004, some volunteer somewhere made a button that just was all letters, and it was with JK before Iowa. And John Kerry actually saw that on a volunteer and walked over to them and asked them to take it off, because he said the most important thing is to grow, and we need to reach out to people as they drop out. We need to bring them in. And I don't know that I necessarily saw like that kind of dexterity on the part of the Sanders organization the last time around. So that said, the good thing he has going is that the people he has will get up at 3 in the morning and walk through sleet and rain and snow to get to the polls. They will show up. So he's got that.
Well, I mean, so this is to Ryan's point, though, which is, last time he was that insurgent candidate against Hillary Clinton. Now he's very much could be running a different race, especially if he has the momentum early on. But we should also talk about, speaking of Bernie, is he gave a new interview to Vice where he talks about, Henry, how he won't be attacking Elizabeth Warren. Now, this is something I've actually kind of observed, which is as Elizabeth Warren and Bernie really do start to sit around the same poll numbers, that Bernie has been playing nice with Elizabeth Warren, but the supporters have been battling it out on the theories of change. Crystal talks about this all the time. What do you think about that? Because it's interesting, with Warren very much being much more of an institutionalist and Bernie saying, no, we need a revolution. You would think at some point that these worlds do have to collide.
They do. They do have to collide at some point if it gets closer down to that point. And Bernie says that in this interview with Vice last night, basically that it's going to get down to that point eventually, maybe, and that's what he says. I mean, him and Elizabeth Warren have worked in the Senate together for years upon years. They have a background, and I understand you don't want to bash a fellow, another candidate and a senator, a Democratic senator. It just makes the party look bad.
I see a lot of talk out there among Bernie supporters in particular about this. What you talk about this different theories of change. But Elizabeth Warren has completely adopted his theory of change. When she was asked in the most recent debate, how are you going to overcome Mitch McConnell? What she said is, we're going to build a mass movement outside of Washington, and we're going to storm Washington with it, and we're going to force change. And that is the Bernie Sanders argument. Now, the question becomes, is she serious about that, and can she do it? If you go back to how she created the CFPB, it was that. It was using outside pressure to change the game inside Washington. Every time Chris Dodd would try to weaken the CFPB or agree to somebody that, okay, instead of having a tough director, we're going to have a commission, or we're going to have 5 commissioners running it, or we're going to have, this is how we're going to fund it, or whatever. That would leak out. Warren often was the reason it leaked out, and there'd be a ton of pressure put on Washington. So she's done this before.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think, and this has been said before, they're pretty much the same candidate. I mean, they're fighting for basically all the same things, which again, all the Democrats are, but they are more alike than I think any other of the candidates.
I don't know if that, I mean, this is the thing, Roger, is that her constituency is totally different than Bernie's. Bernie's is a working class coalition. Elizabeth Warren's is very much like an upper middle class white liberal coalition. And despite this, the recent Pew polling showed her African American support only around 4%. So it also comes down to, how could you actually win and enact this sort of change? One thing I've heard discussion of is, Bernie might be the top of the ticket. Elizabeth Warren would be a great executor. Would that be something that you think she would consider?
No.
Yeah.
Only because I would start with the idea that no one wants 2 senators on a ticket, right? Like, I would think either one of them, roughly coming from from the Northeast, you would want to go Rocky Mountain governor. You would want to go Southwest, Southeast, something like that. So I don't buy much into that. I don't know. The tonalities of their organizations are very different. I think Warren, is still there's a more aspirational flavor to her campaign, and I've also seen the Sanders thing for me has always been somewhat opaque. I just have never really gotten it or him. And there's especially online and stuff, there's a nastiness, there's like a litmus kind of purity test among some of his people. And there seems to be a latent appetite for cannibalizing that I don't see in some of the other campaigns. And this is just like peripheral for me, but I mean, that's my sense of it.
That reflects frustration, I think, that a lot of Democrats have had, where they, and particularly with Obama, they invested so much energy and hope into Obama, and then so many were disappointed that he didn't go further. And so now they see that this guy's been saying the same thing for 40 years, and so that's a plus. And so if you haven't been saying the same thing for 40 years, then their antenna is very much up. Oh, well, they're going to betray us. There's a lot of anxiety around that. But I think it's actually not quite right to think of it in terms of competing coalitions yet. I think it's true that Bernie Sanders has a particular coalition at this point, but I think it's premature to say that Warren has one. Yeah. The way that people talk about Warren's coalition is to look at, okay, here are the people that the crosstabs say are supporting her, but that's been in flux a lot, and it really surged after the New York Times came out in late May with her story about how she's surging, and then she surged, and if you look, her coalition is New York Times readers. But is that a coalition, or are those people who have been told by New York Times and MSNBC that this is the person that you should get behind, and they ended up getting behind? So it's not clear that that's a firm coalition.
Not quite
at this
clear
point.
yet. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you both coming, and we'll see you soon. Tomorrow on Rising, we're going to talk about the prospect of a Trump-Rouhani meeting. The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, will also be here to give us a debrief. And journalist Katie Halper tells us about her podcast, Useful Idiots, and her conversation with presidential hopeful Tulsi Gabbard. Thank you, Ryan, so much for joining us today. And everybody, don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you tomorrow.